Hello and welcome to Ring of Fire Con, and I am Jody Lynn Nye, a science fiction and fantasy writer. I'm here today to interview Nancy Kress, who is a most accomplished and many celebrated science fiction writer. So Nancy, thank you very much for being with us. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me.
I have a number of questions for you, and the first one is, why do you write science fiction instead of any of the other possibilities of subgenres, genres, types of fiction? What interests you about science fiction so much?
I actually didn't start writing science fiction. I started writing fantasy. And my first 3 novels were fantasy. And then I switched over to science fiction, and I really don't know why, Jody. Nothing in my career has been planned. It's always been a matter of, oh, this sounds interesting. Let me pursue this. And then somehow there it is, a science fiction novel. The first one was a sort of soft science fiction novel. And then as time went on, I got more and more interested in actual science. I'm not trained as a scientist, and I have to do a lot of research in order to write it, but I got more and more interested in genetic engineering in particular. So at first it was kind of a drifting, we'll try this, we'll try that. And I have written a couple of thrillers as well. But eventually I settled down into hard SF, or at least high viscosity SF. Science fiction, rather than writing, for instance, romance, well, that was never a possibility, or mainstream, or one of the others. I discovered science fiction when I was 14, which is late. And the reason it took so long is that my elementary school had a boys section and a girls section. How's that for 1950s? Ooh. And the boys section was all shelved. Science fiction was all shelved in the boys section with little rockets on the spine, and fantasy was all shelved in the girls section with little fairies on the spine. So I read a lot of fantasy when I was a kid, but very little science fiction. And then when I was 14, I stumbled across Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. And by page 3, I was hooked. It was such a wide canvas. There were so many possibilities, and I just never turned back.
That is fantastic. I think that you probably have come across the same thing, especially in light of the way that your school library was divided. How do you deal with the newcomers, usually very young men, who exclaim, women writing science fiction? Women don't write science fiction, they write fantasy.
I don't see as much of that as I used to. I've been doing this for 40 years now. And when I started, there was a lot more of that. There was a lot more of that division. And especially if you wanted to write hard SF, which I'm defining as more or less scientifically correct, building on actual science. There were very few women doing it. Joan Slonczewski and Catherine Asaro come to mind. And there were women writing space opera, which I'm not qualifying as hard SF, because Faster Than Light does not actually build on science as we think we know it right now. So there were not very many of us. And I can remember a couple comments. I can, with the Old Boys Club, a couple of jokes that were not particular, that were somewhat sexist. But in the last 10, 15 years, not so much. I think there is more acceptance than there used to be of women writing science.
I'm very, very glad to hear that. I was knocked out by your novella, Beggars in Spain. So what interested you in genetic engineering, and how did you get around to that particular facet of science?
Well, the first time I wrote about it was Beggars in Spain, and that was written out of sheer jealousy. It's about people who don't need to sleep. I'm a long sleeper. If I don't get at least 8 hours, I don't function well the next day. And I know people who can get by on 5, 6 hours, sometimes even 4, and be perfectly at the top of their game. And I envy that. They get more life than I do. So I wanted to write about people who didn't need to sleep. And my first couple attempts to write that story were really, really bad and were rejected everywhere, because it wasn't genetic engineering. It was just, this happened somehow. Mm-hmm. The first attempt was rejected by everybody in the business, and Robert Silverberg rejected it twice. He had changed editorial chairs between my first submission and the second submission. I didn't realize that. And he sent me a little note that said, I didn't like this the first time, and I don't like it the second time either. So I put the story away. And about 5 years later, I said, well, maybe we could do this through genetic engineering. And so I started to read about it. And the more I read about it, the more interested I got, because this is the future. Actually, it's the present as far as a lot of genetic engineering is going on. What did you eat for breakfast, Jody Lynn? What did you eat for breakfast?
Uh, Today, nothing. Yesterday, hot cocoa, which I have every day. Why?
That's it?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
milk, it's calcium, it's protein, and
most people who ate something for breakfast a little more substantial ate genetic engineering. Most, if they had anything with canola oil in it, which is almost all baked goods, if they had anything with soy in it, if they
Mhm.
had anything um, with many, many, many other things, it's already here in crops, and it's already here in bacteria. If you know someone who is insulin dependent diabetic, that insulin is made by genetically altered E. coli.
Right? Yes.
And it's here. It isn't yet here for people, but that doesn't mean it won't be here eventually. So as I started reading about this, I thought, wow, this is the future. And it has good applications and it has bad applications. Like everything else, it's a tool. Um, the day man discovered fire, the crime of arson became a possibility. And the same is true with any other scientific tool, and including genetic engineering. So I write about it because I think all science fiction is a rehearsal, not for the future, but for a possible future. We write something that's plausible and we say, it could go this way. It could
Mhm.
go this way. And sometimes it does. Other than my novel for Bain, my most recent publication is a standalone novella from Tachyon called Sea Change. And it's about the genetic engineering of crops.
Mhm.
And this is already here and is going to have to be here, in my view, to a much greater extent as climate change changes what will grow where.
Right.
So I did a lot of research on that, and I was trying to present a balanced view. This is the good, this is the bad. This is what could happen, this is what could happen.
Mhm.
Because we're rehearsing the future.
Every story begins with conflict of some kind. So I think that you're looking into instead of just the what if something went terribly wrong.
Yeah, and also I don't usually write um, villains. So
Mhm.
the conflict can't come from the pure evil kind of thing that's very popular in fantasy. It has to come from people who actually think that they're doing the right thing
Mhm.
and that they're actually aiding, if if not the whole race, then at least the corporations. And when you start looking at it that way, it's easier to say, okay, well, why are they doing this? And is there anything there that is actually worth preserving and admirable? And is there anything there that is dangerous? And genetic engineering, I'm not whitewashing this. It's dangerous. It's
It is
dangerous for
dangerous.
people. It's dangerous for microbes. It's
Mhm.
dangerous for crops. And it is dangerous as a weapon because we could, and in fact, there's some evidence that Saddam Hussein was working on this. We could create altered diseases that are targeted towards the tiny little differences in racial genomes. There aren't many of them, but there are some. For
Mhm.
instance, um, Blacks tend to get sickle cell anemia.
Mhm.
Type X is a disease that Jewish people are more prone to. There are little wedges, and you could genetically engineer bugs, germs to go to attack those weak points, which is what one of my biothrillers, Stinger, is about.
Mhm. So when you are researching the science, who do you go to? What do you read? What's your first stop when you come up with an idea, when something strikes you, and perhaps you see something on the news and you say, "Oh, that would make an interesting story." What's your first stop?
I think the first step is the same as everybody's first step for everything nowadays, which is the internet. And you have to be careful because obviously there's a lot of disinformation out there. But if I go to things like the CDC site and NIH and places like that, then I can often glean enough information to start to think about how I want to go. Books are good too, but they tend to, by the time they're actually in print, some of it tends to be outdated, but some of it is useful.
Mhm.
And then when I've got an idea worked out in my mind or on paper, I will go to actual scientists. I collect microbiologists the way some people collect butterflies. I don't stick pins in them, though. And I have people that I can ask, and I can say, what about this? Do you think this is plausible? How would this work? My best friend is a doctor, and she will help me with things that are medical. And when I go beyond medical into the research, then I can consult microbiologists. Because I do try very hard to get it as plausible as possible. And when it's not plausible, when it's going to be space opera, or when I'm using the tropes of science fiction in order to write something that is more allegorical, then I try to signal that up front to the readers so that they're not expecting a hard SF story.
Well, that means that your readers can trust you, because you'll tell them this one is not hard science fiction, but it explores an idea.
I'll tell them if they're paying attention. I mean, I'm not going to say it outright, but if they're paying attention to the prose and the characters and the way things are presented, they should get that idea.
I see. What are your inspirations? What other authors write things that delight you as a reader? We all read a lot as well as writing a lot. Who's
Ursula Le Guin is my all-time favorite. Ursula Le Guin is my
yes, of course,
favorite SF writer. When I read in 1969, when I read The Dispossessed, or 70, either The Left Hand of Darkness was one and the other was a little later. When I read that book, that was the first. I had enjoyed science fiction a lot for its ideas, for its plots, for its excitement. I had never felt that the characters measured up to the depth and complexity of mainstream until I read The Dispossessed. And then Shevek seemed to me just as real, just as complicated, just as contradictory in a way that nonetheless hung together as anybody in mainstream. And I thought, wow, that's possible. You can do that. And then there was a wonderful, limpid, lucid prose that she had along with it. And she is still my favorite, but there are a lot of other writers that I've enjoyed a lot. And I've been trying lately to read the newer writers that are coming up, the younger ones, which at this point is practically everybody. And to me, one of the standouts I just read was Amal Almotar's and Max Gladstone's This Is the Way You Lose the Time War. It's a very strange novella and a very strange future, but compelling and beautifully written. And I was really impressed. It deserved its Nebula and its Hugo.
You delve into the novella format kind of naturally. Is there a reason that you fall between short story and novel? What tells you that this is not going to run full novel length, but it's too complex for a short story?
I always know when I start what length it's going to be. I don't know how I know, but I know. And the novella is my very favorite length. It's long enough to create an interesting alternate reality. Something changes in the present, or it's a future, or it's even as a fantasy. But it's short enough that one major plot line will do it. Whereas with a novel, you really need some braided plot lines, more than one subplots. And the novel is harder for me. None of my awards, except the John W. Campbell Memorial Award for Probability Space, have been for novels. They have all been for novella or shorter fiction. And that's my natural venue.
It's good to know your best strength. But you have written more novels. Your most recent novel is The 11th Gate. It's not about genetic engineering, so tell us what it is about.
Well, I'm going to read from it in the second half of this. And yes, it's space opera. I've written space opera before, and I like it. I like it for the same reason I liked Clarke's Childhood's End, even though that's not space opera, it takes place on Earth, because of its bigness, its wideness. Mm-hmm. When I was young, I discovered Star Trek, the classic original Star Trek. And to say I was smitten doesn't even begin to cover it. We lived way out in the country, and I would stand in the back field and look up and try in the night sky and try to will the Enterprise to be there. I wanted them to land and take me with them. I really, really was trying to will myself into that universe. It was so large and exciting. And it was orderly in the way that the military is orderly, but not bloodthirsty. And they were doing adventure. They were looking for adventure. Also, I had a crush on Mr. Spock.
As so many did.
Did you?
No, actually, I was a Bones girl. I'm McCoy's. He
I
was.
can understand that. I would sometimes waver towards him, but then I'd come back to Spock.
Like me, you also teach writing science fiction. Why do you devote the time and energy to teaching when you could be spending it writing? And where do you teach?
Well, first of all, I was trained as a teacher. When I graduated from college, I didn't start writing until I was nearly 30. When I graduated from college, I was a fourth grade teacher, and I did that for 4 years. And then I had my children, and when I went back to when they were in school, there were no fourth grade jobs left because it was the baby bust. They were laying off elementary school teachers. So I went back and got some more degrees and taught college. And by that time I had published. And as part of teaching college, in addition to the adjuncts, and I would fill in for people, I wasn't tenure track, I would fill in for people on year sabbatical. In addition to the burden of freshman comp, which you can't escape, I would be given creative writing because I'd started to publish. And I found out that I really enjoyed helping young people make their stories better. Where I teach now is not necessarily young people. Walter John Williams and I, every year, we teach a 2-week intensive seminar in writing science fiction in Taos, New Mexico, called Taos Toolbox. And it is intensive. Our students tend to arrive with hiking boots and plans to tour New Mexico. And by the end of the second day, they know they're not going anywhere, not even in the weekend between the 2 weeks, because they have stuff to do all the time. And we've had several graduates of that. Alan Smale, Scott Hawkins, Fran Wild, who have gone on to publish and publish well. And I enjoy it. I like it a lot.
With that in mind, you and I are fellow judges in the Writers of the Future contest, and that also is dedicated to bringing up young talent and giving them a spotlight. So tell me about your connection. When did you get involved? Why are you involved? And what do you get out of it? I'm
involved for what you just said, for putting the spotlight on up and coming young writers. I think that's important. I got involved, I don't remember how many years ago. My late husband, Charles Sheffield, was a judge. And after he died, I thought, well, maybe I should look into this a little more too. And it was still another couple of years, but then I contacted them and had an interview and became a judge for that. And what I get out of it, I guess, is contact with the people, the students coming up, as well as a chance to be in LA and see friends, including you, and people that I know in LA. And it's a nice weekend. I enjoy it. It's nice to see how much enthusiasm and heart it gives to a young writer who's been trying and facing rejection, as we all do, and finally has come across with a story that's getting noticed.
It is a huge jump for them. It's so much of a boost that they would not ordinarily get as short story writers.
Yeah.
I think it's tremendously important. Each one of us has to present to the winners a speech, a seminar of some kind. And what is yours about? What do you say to the young winners of the Writers of the Future contest?
Well, I talk about the things I've learned during my career about writing. And I also talk about the most common mistakes that I see when I'm teaching as at Taos, and why I think they're mistakes and why it would be better, some other strategies that might be better. It's a very technical presentation compared to, I think, some of them. And I'm probably repeating some of the material that Tim Powers and Dave Wolf have already covered because they're the major workshop leaders all week. But it never hurts to hear anything twice. And besides, I don't know what they covered, so maybe I'm not. Who knows?
I find that myself when I'm speaking to them, but they're eager, they're brilliant young talents, and one of the things that I get out of it, and I'd be interested in finding out if you find the same thing, is I'm always looking for something to read that will blow my mind. And the stories that they present to us to judge are often mind-blowing.
Often they are, yeah. There's usually, during the year, we get little packets of stories to rank. We get 8 of them, and then we pick out the top 3 and rank them. And some of them are very run-of-the-mill. I mean, to be fair, those people don't end up the winners. But some of them take chances, and that's one of the things I look for. I look for a story that's taking chances. I look for a story that actually delivers on whatever it seems to have promised. Even if it isn't doing it perfectly, if it has promised me this kind of a story with this kind of a background. Are we talking fantasy here? Are we talking hard SF? I look for that. And I also look for a certain quality in the prose.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to someone who wants to write science fiction?
A couple of different pieces. I would say, first of all, if you can, find a class or a workshop or even something online. I know writers, young writers, and some not so young, who say, well, I don't want to do that because the criticism will discourage me. No, you're going to get criticism your whole life. Even a rejection is a criticism of a sort. And what you need is to open up your mind to the criticism, because it's not you that's being criticized, it's the story. You are not only the story, you are all the stories you will ever write. So take with an open mind what you hear and try to evaluate it, because it won't all be good. And if you are going to find a class or a workshop, try to find one that is taught by, in fact, do find one that is taught by a working SF writer. I have had too many students who have had bad experiences taking courses at colleges and creative writing taught by academics who neither like nor understand science fiction. One student told me that his instructor said, well, I don't know why you want to write this stuff. If reality isn't good enough for you, then maybe you shouldn't be a writer. You don't want this. You want somebody who understands the field and likes it and is capable of teaching you how a science fiction story is constructed. The other thing I would say, 2 more things, is what everybody says. One, you have to keep at it. You have to be persistent. You have to be resilient. And the other is to read. And don't read, as I often find, only Heinlein, Clark, and Asimov. Move beyond, this is true especially young men, move beyond and read what is being written now. Read a lot of different kinds of science fiction that's being written now so that you know what's going on in your field.
As we are giving to the young students, we have been given to by writers who were already in the field when we joined it. What's the best piece of advice that you ever got from one of our seniors, our stars?
I got 2 pieces of advice, but I'll only tell you about one of them.
Okay.
It was from Gene Wolfe. He and I, when I was an adjunct in graduate school, I was teaching, I got called an adjunct because even though I was a student in graduate school, I was also teaching as a TA. I was teaching freshman comp. And Gene Wolfe was brought to the campus to do a reading and a lecture, and also to co-teach a class in the summer, a 1-week seminar with me. It was actually in creative writing. This was a sweetener for having done 2 semesters of freshman comp, teaching that. And I had done this with some other people, and it was always good. But Gene said something in class that I grilled him about later because it seemed to me really interesting. And the piece of advice was this: always try to have 2 things going on in a story so that at the end they come together and affect and solve each other. You don't want just one thing going on, you want 2 things. It might be an external problem and an internal situation. It might be 2 external things, but even the shortest story should have two things going on that come together at the end. So I sat down with my volume of Ursula Le Guin, The World's 12 Quarters, and a bunch of other stuff, a couple of Gardner's Dozois Best SF of the Year. And I started reading and looking at the stories and thinking if Gene's advice applied, and almost always it did. So I took it to heart, and that was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got.
He was a terrifically analytical writer, as well as writing pure poetry.
Yeah. He was not an easy writer.
No, not at all.
but I enjoyed his stuff a lot.
Mhm. And what changes in the field have you seen over the 40 years you've been publishing? And what positive trends do you see developing?
Oh, there's been enormous changes. When I came into the field, science fiction was king and fantasy was sort of trailing along on the end. Um, the change had already started. When the Ballantines produced inter- paperback copies of the Lord of the Rings cycle in 1965, that began it. In my dorm rooms in college, every third dorm room had that huge poster of Middle Earth with more, you remember it, with the
I
Shire
remember it
and
well.
Mordor at the other. Yeah, and fantasy was just starting to rise, but science fiction was still king. And the ones that ended up on the bestseller list, the New York Times bestseller list, not just SF, were science fiction. They were Asimov's, and all that has changed. Science fiction is now the tail, and fantasy is the dog wagging it. That's obviously what sells most and what many people want to read. That was a big change.
Mhm.
Another change, I missed the big influx of the first wave of women writers coming into the field. That was in the early 70s, and I didn't start writing until the mid to late 70s. But they were still the newcomers then. So to read Le Guin, to read Joanna Russ, to read Susan Haddon Elgin, to read Susie McKee Charnas was a different take on the SF that I've been reading since I was 14. That was a big change in the field. Then Bruce Sterling and his cyberpunks dragged in a huge change in that science fiction could no longer look, in his words, as though it was all taking place in the state of Delaware, no matter where it was set.
In
You
the
had
1950s.
the state of Delaware, right? You had to bring in global influences because it was a global world. And you had to bring in the internet because it was an internet world. And money was moving around the world at the speed now of electrons. And you could no longer write the same kind of things that just looked as though it was middle American and nothing else. That was a big change. And now the most recent change has been the growing diversity in science fiction. There are more Black writers, there are more people of color writers, there are more foreign science fiction is being noticed. And all of these changes are good too, because they broaden the field and they bring in different voices. I really enjoyed N.K. Jemison's The Fifth Season. I think that's a unique fantasy in a kind of a world I haven't seen before, and with very strong characters. And she's only one of many writers, new writers that are coming in. And yeah, there have been a lot of changes over 40 years.
Some fantastic things. What's next for you? You're going to be reading from us from your most recent novel. What are you working on now?
Right now, to descend from the heights to the plains, I'm not writing because we're trying to housebreak a puppy. And this turns out to be a lot more difficult than I expected. It requires a lot more supervision of said puppy for hours, and then grabbing him the second he looks like he's going to do something he shouldn't be doing on the floor and rushing him outside. This is a fallow period for writing. The puppy is now 11 weeks old, and I hope eventually to be able to get back to it. But right now, that is my top priority. And it's
Are you
very,
finding
it's very unliterary, but there it is.
that it's a positive thing you're doing, though? Have you found that the pandemic and the resulting shutdown and the isolation has played heck with your productivity or your creativity at all?
No, it really hasn't. I always thought I would make a really good prisoner. I'm basically sedentary, and although I really enjoy seeing my friends, and I miss that, I miss parties, I miss going out to dinner, most of my day was already spent at home, most days anyway. And we are fortunate enough to live near the beach, and we can take walks on the beach every day. So I don't feel too cooped up. This is in Seattle. I don't feel too cooped up. Um, so it hasn't made that big a change. I was working steadily all through the spring and right up until we got Pippin.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure I will again. I mean, he is going to get house trained eventually, right, Jody Lynn? He will.
Yes, I promise you, it will happen.
God, I hope so.
Oh my. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you would like to tell the viewers?
No, you've been very thorough. And I guess I'm going to read now from the 11th gate.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, and again, I want to make the caveat, this is not hard SF. This is a space opera. Okay. All right, and I'm going to start at the beginning. Okay. New California. The wolves needed dusting again. Sloan Paraguay rose from his massive Carthwood desk and ran a finger over the film on the animal's gray pelts and yellow glass eyes. The cleaning bot should be able to do better than this. He said to the wall screen, "Note to Morris, reprogram J84 dusting." Sophia entered Sloan's office. "Father," she said, "2 more appointments." Sloan glanced appreciatively at his daughter. His dead wife had chosen for Sophia the genetic template of a Mayan princess rather than Yvette's own watery Nordic beauty, and the choice suited Sophia. Tall and strong-featured, she had inherited her father's drive, competency, and preference for formality. You couldn't engineer personality, but Sloan's famous luck had held with Sophia. She ran as much of Paraguay Corporation and its 3 worlds, 4 if you counted Prometheus, not technically a Paraguay planet, but after all, nobody else was on it, as Sloan did, and Sophia was his sole heir. He'd made sure of that. Neither her sister nor Sloan's son, dead in the same plague that had killed Yvette, had possessed ability or inclination to govern. But in line after Sophia, Sloan didn't choose to ponder that long-term problem, not right now. He was tired. It had been a long day. Beyond the window, 2 moons gleamed above his corporate headquarters' soaring towers. Sloan wanted his dinner, whiskey, and bed. The rejuve treatments could only do so much for someone as old as he was, and it was unlike Sophia to allow appointments this late. In fact, Sophia rarely facilitated appointments at all. That was Morris's job. So these must be important. Who are they? He'd had his biweekly meeting with the full board of directors just this afternoon. It was unusual for something urgent to arise since then. "Sue Lynn," Sophia said. "I'm sorry, Father," she insisted. Of course she did. Still, Sophia could have denied Sue Lynn if she'd wanted to. That Sue Lynn was here was testimony to the one thing that Sloan and Sophia disagreed on, which looked like he couldn't avoid after all. Some distant day, Sue Lynn, as Sloan's oldest grandchild, would inherit Paraguay Corporation. Sophia wanted her trained for that, which was why she maximized Sue Lynn's time with her grandfather. Sloan, however, had other plans that he did not yet choose to share with Sophia. Too vague still. Who's the other appointment? The sharply angled planes of Sophia's beautiful face hardened, which meant that she considered something important. A spacer from Polyglot who, why would I want to see a spacer from Polyglot? Who claims to have discovered something important. He's been vetted, and I think you should hear his story. You've already heard it, Sloan said. I have. Sophia said no more, and it wasn't like her to be so mysterious. Sloan didn't like it, but he trusted her judgment, even though Polyglot was not to be trusted. The planet was weak because it was not unified, a patchwork of individual nations. Nations, that outmoded concept, could never equal the efficiency and strength of a corporate state. It was amazing that once, on Terra, they ever had. He said, "Show in the spacer. What's his name?" "David M. Gordon." At least he wasn't a Landry. But then, no amount of vetting would have admitted a Landry to Sloan's office. "I know how busy you are. I'll see Gordon alone." They both knew that alone actually meant with Carl Chavez, Sloan's augmented and superbly trained bodyguard. But Sophia said, "without Chavez." Sloan raised an eyebrow, but he trusted Sophia's judgment. She and Chavez left as David Gordon entered. He spotted the wolves and stopped cold. The taxidermist had captured well the animal's fierce, vanished vitality. Wolves? So he recognized them. Most people did not. Neither wolves nor anything like them had ever existed on any of the 8 worlds. Gordon was short enough to suggest no genetic augments, more muscle than most spacers, younger than Sloan had expected. Handsome, with an unpleasant swagger. His eyes, deep brown, studied the wolves. "You had them gene-made?" "Of course." Of course, indeed. Wolves not only didn't exist on the 8 worlds, they didn't exist on Earth. Almost nothing existed on the ruin that Earth had become, had allowed to become. Gordon might be intelligent, but he had the bad manners that flourished on Polyglot, the first settled world, neither Paraguay nor Landry. Sloan said deliberately, "Hello, Mr. Gordon. I'm Sloan Paraguay." Gordon ignored the rebuke. "Why did you have the wolves made and then kill them?" "I didn't kill them," Sloan said, irritated. Further rebuke was necessary. Gordon didn't know as much as he thought he did. "They died of natural causes." "Without breeding first?" "Please state your business, Mr. Gordon. My time is limited." Sloan had no intention of explaining to this rude outsider that geneticists had been able to reconstruct the wolves from Terran DNA, but had not been able to create a female that could carry to term. 7 miscarriages had weakened the female. The last had killed her. The male had died alone and defeated, unwilling even to hunt in the preserve that Sloan had created for him. Sloan kept them as a powerful reminder of what happened to a family that did not expand, did not breed strong heirs, did not continuously master its environment. Gordon's eyes sharpened. "Yes, sir. I've made a discovery that I think will really interest you. I'm proposing that you and I create an expedition to explore it, creating a business deal to share the resulting profits." Sloan didn't change expression, despite Gordon's incredible effrontery. Why had Sophia admitted him? Sloan did not see people like this. He was, after all, director of Paraguay Corporation and governor of the corporation's 3 planets, all of which were run both benevolently and with the tight control necessary to ensure that none of them would ever suffer Earth's fate. On Paraguay planets, everyone worked, everyone ate, everyone had medical care, everyone was educated. The small land masses on each planet were environmentally protected. The population kept optimal. Most important, the stargates between worlds, those precious portals that made everything else possible, were so well guarded by the Paraguay Corporation Space Service that not even the Landry fleet could get through. And this arrogant puppy from a world with no central government, no ruling family, not even a common language, from a planet rife with constant international tensions and wasted resources, this unmannerly scrap of space jetsam wanted to make a deal with Sloan Paraguay? He said frostily, "I am not interested in acquiring another mining asteroid." "It's not an asteroid," Gordon said, "or a drifting renegade moon. It's not a moon." Gordon said, "It's another gate." Sloan stared at him, for once unable to control his expression, but only for a moment. "There are no more gates. Everyone has looked." "Not where I did. I'm the only one who knows where it is, Director Paraguay. Are you all right? Should I call your aide?" "Certainly not," Sloan snapped, although he put one hand on his desk. Another gate? Not possible. But Sophia had vetted Gordon. If he was a habitual liar, or crazy, or in the pay of the Landrys, she would know. Sloan's intel network, both overt and covert, was superb. He said, "Did you take your vessel through this alleged gate?" "No," Gordon said. "I don't know what's on the other side, but since the gates are always near a planet, or pretty near anyway, and there isn't a planet on this side of the gate, I want a big ship under me before I confront whatever's beyond the gate." "Why didn't you take this to the Landrys? Why me?" Gordon made a face. "Libertarians, they don't agree on how to act, and with everybody doing their own thing, you're never sure that one Landry's thing won't derail another Landry's thing. I don't want to be derailed or delayed by endless discussion because everybody is equal." Sloan said they do have a military organization. Although he'd always wondered how Landry men and women, raised with doctrines of individuality and self-reliance as their supreme values, could become soldiers who had to take orders. But somehow they did, despite the fact that their independent businesses often ignored their home planet's best interest, if it would make individual corporations more money. Gordon said, "Yeah, they have a military, but you have totalitarian control of Paraguay resources." Sloan, irritated all over again, said, "That isn't accurate. I am a CEO, not a dictator." He wasn't about to digress into a discussion of political philosophy. Another gate. There had always been only 10 gates. Physicists said they were a natural phenomenon, inexplicably stable children of the unstable quantum flux. No one understood the gate's origins, not even after 150 years of trying. The gates were inexplicable, permanent, and immovable, not unlike the enmity between Landrys and Paraguays. Both families had been among the first to escape the dying Earth, and both had claimed planets connected by the newly discovered gates orbiting Earth's moon. Both had defended their claims. In a bewildering new environment, facing unknown challenges, family was all the settlers had, and they had built civilizations on it. Sloan was not interested in where the gates came from or why they orbited only habitable worlds. All that was as abstract and pointless as Earth's ancient history. What mattered was the fact of the gates' existence, not their cause. What mattered was Paraguay's corporation obligations to its citizens. What resources, what opportunities might lie behind an 11th gate? He said, "Have you proof of this gate, Mr. Gordon?" "I have. Spectrum readings and other scientific evidence." Sloan said to his implant, "Sophia, I want 3 physicists from the university here immediately." She said, "I already have them waiting outside." Sloan moved towards a conference room, saying over his shoulder, "This way, Mr. Gordon." Gordon followed him. Sue Lynn would have to wait. Let her pout. She never wanted anything substantial anyway. Another gate. As Sloan passed the dead wolves, their dusty, glassy, yellow eyes gleamed at him in the overhead light. Okay, there you have an 11th gate. Can I? 11th gate. Oh, okay. I think we're probably out of time.
Well, I think we have a bit more time left, but I thank you so much for allowing us to hear your story and for talking to us this afternoon.
Okay, I enjoyed it, Jody Lynn.
Yes, thank you.
Stay
And
safe, stay healthy, stay safe.
Hope that we get to see you in real life again soon.
Next year.
Next year.
Vaccine next year. Bye now.
Hoping so. Thank you very much.